Why did historians become pale when enlarging the face of the younger girl in this 1891 image? The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Boston General Hospital's medical archives, creating a rhythmic backdrop to Dr. Helena Brennan's meticulous work. At 38, Helena had dedicated her career to genetic research, specifically tracking hereditary conditions through historical populations. Her current project involved examining 19th century photographs for visual evidence of genetic disorders that had gone undiagnosed in their time. She carefully lifted another photograph from the archive box, this one labeled simply, "The Palmer Family, Boston, 1891. The image showed a typical upper-middle-class family of the era. A father in a formal suit, a mother in an elaborate dress with a high collar, and 3 children arranged by height. 2 boys flanked a younger girl, perhaps 8 years old, who stood slightly forward, her expression solemn. Helena placed the photograph under her digital scanner, sophisticated equipment that could capture details invisible to the naked eye. She had examined hundreds of similar photographs over the past 6 months, cataloging facial features and physical characteristics that might indicate genetic conditions. Most images revealed nothing unusual, just ordinary families frozen in time. But as the enhanced image appeared on her computer screen, Helena leaned forward with sudden interest. She isolated the younger girl's face and magnified it, adjusting contrast and clarity. Her breath caught as distinctive features became apparent, features she recognized immediately from years of genetic research. The girl's face showed subtle but unmistakable characteristics: an unusually long facial structure, deep-set eyes with particular spacing, and a high arched palate visible even in the closed-mouth photograph. The fingers visible in the image were distinctively elongated, the joints slightly pronounced. These weren't the features of a typical 8-year-old from 1891. Helena's hands trembled as she pulled up a reference database, a comprehensive collection of documented Marfan syndrome cases. Marfan syndrome was a genetic connective tissue disorder affecting the skeletal system, cardiovascular system, and eyes. In the 19th century, it was often fatal, particularly in childhood. She compared the girl's facial structure to confirmed historical cases. The similarities were undeniable, but what made Helena's pulse quicken wasn't just the diagnosis itself, it was the implications. If this girl had Marfan syndrome, she should have died young. Yet something about this photograph suggested a different story. Helena reached for her phone and called Dr. Vincent Carr, her colleague in cardiology. "Vincent, I need you to see something. I think I found a documented case of Marfan syndrome from 1891. And if I'm right, this girl shouldn't have survived childhood." Dr. Vincent Carr arrived at the medical archives within 20 minutes, his curiosity evident. At 45, Vincent had spent 2 decades studying hereditary cardiovascular conditions, and the possibility of examining a historical Marfan case intrigued him deeply. He pulled up a chair beside Helena, his eyes immediately focusing on the enhanced image. "Show me what you're seeing," he said, his tone professional. Helena walked him through her observations, pointing out each characteristic feature. Vincent listened intently, occasionally asking her to zoom in on specific details: the length of the fingers, the facial structure, the subtle spinal curvature. "The presentation is classic," Vincent agreed after several minutes. "These are textbook Marfan characteristics, but you're right. Survival past childhood in 1891 would have been extraordinary. The cardiovascular complications alone would have been fatal." "Exactly," Helena said. "Most Marfan patients in that era died from aortic dissection or heart valve problems before reaching their teens. There was no surgical intervention, no medication, no monitoring." Vincent studied the photograph with renewed intensity. "Unless she didn't have the full syndrome, Marfan presents on a spectrum. Some patients have primarily skeletal manifestations with minimal cardiovascular involvement. It's rare but possible." He began searching the hospital's historical records database. Boston General was one of the premier medical institutions during that period. "Let me search for the Palmer family name in our patient records." The database search took several minutes. Finally, results appeared. Vincent's eyes widened. "Helena, look at this." Catherine Palmer admitted multiple times between 1889 and 1895. Age matches the girl in the photograph. The diagnosis is listed as constitutional weakness with cardiac symptoms. Helena leaned in to read the entries. The records were sparse, but they painted a picture of a child under careful medical supervision. Regular examinations, notes about unusual height, observations about joint flexibility, and repeated warnings about avoiding physical exertion. "Someone knew," Helena whispered. "Some physician recognized this child had a serious condition, even without a name for it, and they were trying to keep her alive." Vincent scrolled through more entries. "Here's something interesting. Starting in 1892, there's a series of consultations with a Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore. I don't recognize that name." Helena quickly searched for Whitmore. What she found made her sit back in surprise. "Vincent, Nathaniel Whitmore wasn't on staff here. He was a private physician who'd studied in Europe, specifically where the earliest research into connective tissue disorders was beginning. He published papers on hereditary conditions in children." "So the family sought out a specialist," Vincent said. someone who might understand what was happening when other physicians couldn't explain it. The Boston Medical Library occupied a historic building in the city's medical district. Helena arrived early the following morning, armed with a list of publications authored by Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore between 1885 and 1900. The librarian, Thomas, greeted her warmly. "Dr. Brennan, what fascinating mystery are you chasing this time?" "I'm looking for anything published by Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore, particularly case studies involving children with skeletal or cardiovascular abnormalities between 1890 and 1895. Thomas's eyes lit up. Whitmore, brilliant physician far ahead of his time. Some contemporaries thought him eccentric because he insisted on detailed patient documentation and believed in hereditary disease transmission. He led her to bound medical journals. The Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, complete volumes from 1890 to 1895. Whitmore published regularly. Helena settled at a reading table, carefully turning yellowed pages. The journal entries were dense, but Whitmore's articles stood out for their meticulous detail and forward-thinking observations. She found her first reference in an 1892 edition titled Observations on Hereditary Disorders of Connective Tissue in Pediatric Patients. Whitmore wrote, "I have observed several children presenting with a constellation of physical characteristics that appear inherited. Unusual height, elongation of extremities, particularly fingers and toes, excessive joint flexibility, and cardiovascular abnormalities including heart murmurs. These children often present with characteristic facial structure, dolichocephaly, deep-set eyes, high palate. I propose these features represent a unified hereditary condition affecting connective tissues." Helena's pulse quickened. This was Marfan syndrome, described 4 years before Antoine Marfan officially identified it. She continued reading and found case study. Female patient, age 8 at initial presentation, demonstrating all aforementioned characteristics. Auscultation reveals mitral valve prolapse with regurgitation. The child's father reports his own mother possessed similar characteristics and died suddenly at age 32. I have advised the family regarding limitations on physical activity and necessity of regular cardiac monitoring. Helena photographed the pages with trembling hands. The age, the timing, the cardiovascular findings. This had to be Catherine Palmer. She found another reference in 1893. The young patient previously described continues under my care. Contrary to initial concerns, she has maintained relatively stable health with careful management. I have implemented restricted physical exertion, regular cardiac assessment, and nutritional supplementation. Most intriguingly, her cardiovascular symptoms, while present, appear less severe than expected given her skeletal manifestations. This suggests possible variation in how the condition affects different systems. Thomas appeared beside her. "Finding what you need?" "More than expected," Helena replied. "Thomas, would you have records about Dr. Whitmore himself, whether he maintained private patient files?" "I do. Whitmore donated his personal medical library when he retired in 1904. There's a collection in our rare books vault, personal journals, correspondence, case notes. Not digitized yet." Helena's excitement built. "Can I access them?" After 3 days immersed in Whitmore's private papers, Helena shifted to genealogical research, tracing the Palmer family through census records, city directories, and death certificates. The work was painstaking, but gradually revealed the family's trajectory through decades following that 1891 photograph. Thomas Palmer was a successful textile merchant. His wife, Eleanor, came from an established Boston family. Their 3 children were Catherine, the youngest, and her 2 older brothers, William and Henry. Property records showed they'd owned a substantial Beacon Hill home, but death records told a compelling story. Henry died in 1887 at age 19 from sudden cardiac failure. William died in 1903 at 24, also from heart failure. The pattern was unmistakable. Both brothers had likely inherited the same genetic condition, and both died young from cardiovascular complications. Yet Catherine's death record was nowhere to be found in the expected time frame. Helena searched through records from 1895 to 1910, expecting to find Catherine's death in her late teens or early 20s. Nothing appeared. She expanded her search and finally found it. Catherine Eleanor Palmer died 1931, age 48, from heart failure following long illness. Helena sat back in astonishment. Catherine had survived to middle age, an extraordinary achievement for someone with Marfan syndrome before modern medicine. But more remarkable discoveries followed. Marriage records showed Catherine had married in 1903 at age 20 to Jonathan Foster, a physician who had studied under Dr. Whitmore. Birth records revealed Catherine and Jonathan had 3 children: Eleanor, born 1904, Thomas, born 1906, and Anne, born 1909. Helena's hands trembled. Catherine had not only survived to adulthood, but had married and had children, 3 opportunities to pass on the Marfan gene. Each child had a 50% chance of inheriting the condition. She traced the children's records. Eleanor died in 1918 at age 14 during the Spanish flu epidemic. Thomas lived to age 34, dying in 1940 from complications from cardiac disease. But Anne was different. Anne Foster had married in 1930, becoming Anne Carmichael. Death records showed she'd lived until 1987, dying at age 78 from natural causes. Anne had survived to old age, extraordinarily rare for someone who likely carried the Marfan gene. The genealogical trail continued. Anne had 4 children, born between 1932 and 1940. Helena traced each line forward through marriages, births, and deaths. The family had spread across the country, descendants now living in California, Texas, Florida, and Massachusetts. What struck Helena most was the pattern. Some family members died young from cardiac causes, suggesting full Marfan expression. Others lived normal lifespans with no apparent symptoms. This variation suggested something unusual, possibly a mutation producing variable expression. Helena compiled a family tree spanning 5 generations. She identified 12 living descendants in the direct maternal line from Catherine through Anne. The Massachusetts Medical Society's historical archive occupied the 4th floor of a building near Massachusetts General. Helena had arranged access through her hospital credentials, and the archivist, Gloria, had pulled everything related to Dr. Jonathan Foster's career. Foster maintained a private practice in Boston from 1902 until his death in 1935, Gloria explained. He specialized in internal medicine with a focus on cardiac conditions. He was skilled, though never achieved prominence. He published occasionally, but spent most energy on patient care. Helena began sorting through documents, finding patient ledgers, correspondence, and medical notes spanning 3 decades. In a folder labeled Personal Medical Observations, she found detailed health records for Catherine and their 3 children. The entries began in 1903. C continues under careful monitoring. Her cardiac status remains stable, though I detect slight progression in mitral valve prolapse. Dr. Whitmore and I agree pregnancy would present significant risks. However, C is determined to have children. We will proceed with extreme caution. The entries documented Catherine's first pregnancy in 1904. Foster had monitored her obsessively, weekly examinations, careful tracking of cardiac symptoms, strict activity limitations. Eleanor was born healthy, though Foster immediately noted her unusual length and distinctive facial characteristics. Well, Eleanor shows signs of the maternal condition, he wrote when the baby was 2 months old. Elongated fingers, high palate, slight chest asymmetry. I will monitor carefully for cardiac involvement. Helena found similar records for Thomas and Anne's births. Foster had documented every milestone, every symptom, every concern. He'd been watching for Marfan signs in all 3 children, knowing the genetic odds. The records painted a picture of a family living under constant shadow of genetic illness. Eleanor showed clear Marfan signs by age 5, rapid growth, joint hypermobility, and by age 10, a detectable heart murmur. Thomas displayed milder characteristics, but Foster noted cardiac concerns by his teens. Anne, remarkably, showed minimal signs, slightly tall, some joint flexibility, but no significant cardiac symptoms. What struck Helena was Foster's innovative management. Decades before modern Marfan protocols, he'd implemented the same principles still used today. Restricted strenuous activity, regular cardiac monitoring, prompt treatment of respiratory infections, and careful attention to skeletal issues. She found an entry from 1918. I have lost my eldest daughter. The influenza took her quickly, but I know her weakened cardiovascular system made her unable to fight effectively. Catherine is devastated. I am devastated. We knew Eleanor's time would likely be short, but we hoped for more years. Helena's eyes filled with tears. The clinical language couldn't hide Foster's grief, the anguish of a father and physician who'd fought to save his daughter and failed. Helena met with Vincent and a 3rd colleague, Dr. Rachel Kim, a medical geneticist specializing in connective tissue disorders. They gathered in Helena's office, surrounded by documents, photographs, and the 5-generation family tree spread across her desk. What you found is extraordinary, Rachel said, studying the genealogical chart. Variable expression of Marfan syndrome isn't uncommon, but the pattern here is unusual. Catherine survived to 48, her daughter Anne to 78, both remarkable for untreated Marfan patients of their eras. Vincent pointed to the family tree. And look at the current generation. We have 12 living descendants, most in their 40s through 70s. If they carry the Marfan gene, many have already outlived historical expectations. Which suggests a unique genetic variant, Rachel said. Classic Marfan syndrome is caused by mutations in the FBN1 gene, which codes for fibrillin-1, a protein essential for connective tissue strength. But there are over 3,000 known FBN1 mutations, and they produce wildly different clinical outcomes. Some cause severe childhood disease, others allow relatively normal lifespans with careful management. Helena leaned forward. So you think this family carries a specific FBN1 mutation that produces milder cardiovascular effects while maintaining the skeletal characteristics? It's possible, Rachel said. Or they might have genetic modifiers, other genes that influence how the Marfan mutation expresses itself. Either way, if we could study living family members, compare their genetic profiles, we might identify protective factors that could help current Marfan patients. But we need to contact them carefully, Vincent cautioned. These people might not know their family medical history. We'd be telling them they're potentially at risk for a serious genetic condition. Helena had already drafted a letter, and she passed copies to her colleagues. The letter explained her research, described the historical findings, and invited descendants to participate in a voluntary genetic study. It emphasized that participation was completely optional and that genetic counseling would be provided regardless of whether they chose to participate. I've identified contact information for 8 of the 12 descendants, Helena said. The others have been harder to locate. I'm proposing we send letters to those 8, explain the research, and see who responds. Rachel read through the letter carefully. This is well written and appropriately cautious, but Helena, you should know, even if some agree to participate, this kind of genetic research takes years, identifying specific mutations, understanding their effects, correlating genotype with phenotype. It's complex work. I know, Helena said, but this family's story deserves to be told, and if their unique genetics can help future Marfan patients, we owe it to them to try. They spent the next hour refining the contact letter, ensuring it struck the right balance between explaining the significance of the research and respecting the descendants' privacy and autonomy. Finally, they agreed on the final version. Helena would mail the letters the following day to descendants in California, Texas, Florida, and Massachusetts. Then they would wait and hope that someone would respond. 3 weeks after sending the letters, Helena received her first response. It came via email from a woman named Julia Carmichael, age 54, living in San Diego. She was Anne's granddaughter, making her Catherine Palmer's great-great-granddaughter. The email read, Dr. Brennan, I received your letter about the genetic research involving my family, and I'm very interested in participating. Your letter explained that my great-great-grandmother Catherine may have had Marfan syndrome. This would explain so much about my family's medical history that has always puzzled us. My grandmother Anne was unusually tall and had heart problems in her later years, though she lived to 78. My mother died at 52 from an aortic aneurysm rupture. I've always been tall and flexible, and my cardiologist has mentioned concern about a heart murmur. I never understood why these issues ran in our family. I would very much like to know more and am willing to participate in genetic testing. Helena's hands trembled as she read the email. Julia's mother had died from an aortic aneurysm, a classic Marfan complication. Julia herself had cardiac symptoms. This was an active case, not just historical interest. She immediately called Vincent and Rachel. Within an hour, they'd arranged a video conference with Julia for the following day. They needed to move quickly. If Julia had Marfan syndrome and was showing cardiac symptoms, she needed current medical evaluation and management. The video call began with introductions. Julia appeared on screen, a tall woman with distinctive features. Helena recognized immediately from the photographs the elongated face, the particular eye spacing, the long fingers visible as she gestured while talking. She was looking at her great-great-grandmother across 5 generations. Thank you for responding, Helena began. I want to start by saying that what we discussed today might be concerning, but everything we're learning about your family's medical history could be very beneficial for your health going forward. Julia nodded. I understand. Please, tell me what you found. Helena walked her through the entire discovery. The 1891 photograph, the identification of Marfan characteristics in Catherine, Dr. Whitmore's documentation, Catherine's surprising survival to middle age, and the pattern through subsequent generations. Your great-great-grandmother Catherine had Marfan syndrome, Helena explained. It's a genetic condition that affects connective tissue throughout the body. The most serious complication is cardiovascular. It weakens the walls of blood vessels, particularly the aorta, which can lead to aneurysms or dissection. Julia's expression grew serious. That's what killed my mother, an aortic aneurysm that ruptured suddenly. She was only 52. I'm very sorry, Helena said gently. Julia, based on your family history and the symptoms you mentioned, there's a significant possibility you've inherited the same genetic variant, the heart murmur your cardiologist noted. That needs to be evaluated specifically for Marfan-related cardiac issues. Vincent joined the conversation. Julia, I'm a cardiologist specializing in genetic cardiovascular conditions. I'd like to arrange for you to have a complete cardiac workup. Echocardiogram, possibly CT or MRI imaging of your aorta, and genetic testing. If you do have Marfan syndrome, there are treatments that can prevent the kind of catastrophic event that took your mother. Julia's eyes filled with tears. So this letter might have saved my life? Possibly, Vincent said carefully, but we need to evaluate you properly first. 2 weeks later, Julia flew to Boston for comprehensive medical evaluation at Boston General Hospital. Helena had coordinated with Vincent and Rachel to arrange every necessary test and consultation. Julia would spend 3 days undergoing cardiac imaging, genetic testing, and consultations with multiple specialists. The first day focused on cardiac assessment. Vincent personally performed Julia's echocardiogram, using ultrasound to create detailed images of her heart structure and function. Helena watched from the observation area as the images appeared on screen, her medical training allowing her to recognize abnormalities immediately. Julia's mitral valve showed clear prolapse with moderate regurgitation, exactly what Dr. Whitmore had documented in Catherine over a century ago. But more concerning was the aortic root measurement. The ascending aorta, the large blood vessel carrying blood from the heart, was dilated, measuring 4.2 centimeters when normal should be under 3, 5 centimeters for her body size. Vincent completed the examination and invited Julia to his office to discuss results. Helena and Rachel joined them. Julia, Vincent began carefully, the echocardiogram shows findings consistent with Marfan syndrome. Your mitral valve isn't closing properly, and more importantly, your aorta is enlarged. This is the same kind of weakness that likely caused your mother's aneurysm. Julia absorbed this information with remarkable composure. How dangerous is it? Currently, you're in what we call the monitoring range. Once the aorta reaches 4.5 centimeters, we typically recommend surgical repair to prevent rupture or dissection. You're at 4.2, so we haven't reached that threshold yet, but you need close monitoring. Echocardiograms every 6 months to track any progression. And medication? Yes. We'll start you on a beta blocker, which reduces blood pressure and the force of blood flow, protecting the aorta from further dilation. There's also research suggesting angiotensin receptor blockers may help. With proper management, many Marfan patients live normal lifespans. Rachel added, the genetic testing will take several weeks to process, but it will confirm the diagnosis and identify the specific mutation you carry. This information will be valuable for other family members who might want to be tested. Julia nodded slowly. I have 2 daughters, ages 28 and 25. They both need to be tested, don't they? They each have a 50% chance of inheriting this. Yes, Rachel said gently, but knowing allows for early intervention. If they carry the gene, we can monitor them and prevent complications. Your mother didn't have that opportunity. You and your daughters do. Over the next 2 days, Julia underwent additional testing. CT imaging of her entire aorta, skeletal x-rays to assess bone structure, eye examination to check for lens dislocation, and extensive blood work for genetic analysis. Each test added pieces to the diagnostic picture. On the final day, Helena met privately with Julia to discuss the historical research and what her participation meant for the broader study. Julia, your willingness to come here and undergo this evaluation has been incredibly valuable, but I want to explain what we're hoping to learn from the genetic testing. Your family line shows unusual variation in how Marfan syndrome expresses itself. Catherine survived to 48 and to 78, both remarkable for their times. We think you might carry a specific genetic variant that produces milder cardiovascular effects while maintaining other Marfan characteristics. Would that explain why I'm 54 and still alive when my mother died at 52? Possibly, though your mother's sudden death might have been preventable with proper monitoring. She likely didn't know she was at risk. But yes, there may be something about the specific mutation your family carries that allows for better outcomes with appropriate management. Julia was quiet for a moment. It's strange to think about my great-great-grandmother looking at her photo from 1891 and knowing we share this condition across all these years. She must have been terrified. She was brave, Helena said. The records show she knew what she had, knew the risks, but still married, and had children. She fought to live, and she succeeded far longer than anyone expected. And now her story might help save others. That's what we're hoping. 6 weeks later, Helena received the genetic testing results for Julia. She immediately called Vincent and Rachel to review them before contacting Julia. The 3 gathered in Helena's office, the laboratory reports spread across her desk. Rachel, as the geneticist, walked them through the findings. The results confirm Marfan syndrome caused by a mutation in the FBN1 gene, as we expected. But look at this specific mutation. It's a missense mutation in exon 24, resulting in a glycine to serine substitution at position 1127. Is that significant? Helena asked. Very. This particular mutation has been documented in medical literature, but rarely. It's associated with a milder phenotype, significant skeletal manifestations, but relatively less severe cardiovascular involvement compared to classical Marfan syndrome. Patients with this variant tend to have slower progression of aortic dilation. Vincent leaned forward, studying the report. So, Catherine's survival to 48 and survival to 78, it wasn't just luck or good medical management. They carried a mutation that was inherently less aggressive cardiovascularly. Exactly, Rachel said. Though medical management still mattered enormously. Without Dr. Whitmore's care and later Jonathan Foster's monitoring, Catherine might not have survived despite having the milder variant. But the genetic factor gave her a fighting chance. Helena felt the pieces finally coming together. This explains the variable expression in the family tree. Some descendants inherited the mutation and showed significant symptoms. Others inherited it, but had such mild expression they never knew. And some, like Catherine's son Thomas, who died at 34, may have had additional factors that worsened their outcomes. Environmental factors, other genetic modifiers, even chance events like infections or injuries can all affect how Marfan syndrome manifests, Rachel explained. But having this specific mutation as a baseline meant the family started from a somewhat better position than classical Marfan patients. What do we tell Julia? Vincent asked. The truth, Rachel said. Not that she has a variant associated with milder disease, but that she still needs careful monitoring and management. The mutation doesn't eliminate risk, it reduces it. Her mother's aneurysm proves that, but with proper care, Julia's prognosis is quite good. They called Julia that afternoon with the results. Helena could hear the relief in her voice when they explained that her specific mutation tended toward milder outcomes. Does this mean my daughters will be okay if they have it too? Julia asked. It means they need to be tested and monitored, just like you, Vincent said. But yes, if they inherited the same variant, their long-term prognosis with proper management is very good. They could live completely normal lifespans. Julia was quiet for a moment. Thank you, all of you, for finding that old photograph, for tracking down my family, for caring enough to reach out. You literally saved my life. If we hadn't found that aortic dilation, I could have ended up like my mother. After the call ended, Helena pulled up the 1891 photograph on her screen once more. Catherine Palmer at age 8, standing with her family, unknowingly carrying a genetic secret that would echo through 5 generations. We need to publish this, Rachel said. A case study documenting a specific FBN1 mutation tracked through 5 generations, with historical medical records from the 1890s. This is unprecedented. And we need to contact the other descendants, Vincent added. There are 11 more people who might be carriers. They all deserve the chance to know. Helena nodded, already drafting more letters. Catherine's story was far from over. 4 months after Julia's diagnosis, Helena stood in a conference room at Boston General Hospital, preparing to present her research at the American College of Medical Genetics annual meeting. The room was packed with geneticists, cardiologists, and historians. Word had spread about the remarkable case study spanning 130 years. The presentation screen displayed the 1891 photograph, Catherine Palmer's young face looking out at an audience who now understood what those features meant. Helena had titled her talk, A Family's 5-Generation Journey with Marfan Syndrome, Historical Documentation, Genetic Analysis, and Modern Implications. She walked the audience through the entire story, the discovery of the photograph, the identification of Marfan characteristics, Dr. Whitmore's prescient documentation decades before the syndrome was officially named, the family tree spanning 5 generations, and finally the genetic testing that revealed the specific FBN1 mutation responsible. What makes this case extraordinary, Helena explained, is the combination of historical medical records and modern genetic analysis. Dr. Nathaniel Whitmore documented this condition in the 1890s with remarkable accuracy, implementing management strategies we still use today. His care, combined with the family's specific genetic variant, allowed Catherine Palmer to survive to age 48. Extraordinary for untreated Marfan syndrome of that era. She showed slides of Whitmore's original case notes, Jonathan Foster's detailed records, and the modern genetic analysis. The audience listened in rapt attention. Vincent presented the cardiovascular findings, explaining how Julia's cardiac evaluation had revealed treatable complications that would have gone undetected without the historical research. This case demonstrates the value of genetic research extending beyond the individual patient. By understanding family medical history across generations, we identified and treated a life-threatening condition before it became catastrophic. Rachel concluded with the genetic implications. The specific mutation identified in this family, FBN1C3379GA, is associated with milder phenotype, particularly regarding cardiovascular manifestations. This case adds valuable data to our understanding of genotype-phenotype correlations in Marfan syndrome. More importantly, it demonstrates that some genetic variants, while still serious, may allow for better outcomes with appropriate management. The presentation ended with an update on the family. Julia was doing well on medication, her aortic measurements stable. Both her daughters had been tested. One carried the mutation and was now under cardiac monitoring, the other did not. 4 additional descendants from the Palmer family tree had responded to Helena's letters and undergone genetic testing. 2 were carriers, both now receiving appropriate medical care. During the question period, a senior geneticist stood. Dr. Brennan, this is remarkable work. But I'm curious, what happened to the other descendants you identified? Did they all respond? Helena's expression grew somber. No, of the 12 living descendants we identified, only 6 have responded and agreed to testing. The others either didn't reply or declined participation. We respect their choices, but it's concerning. There may be people with undiagnosed Marfan syndrome who remain at risk. Another physician asked, "Have you considered publishing the family name, making this information more public so other descendants might see it?" "We've discussed it extensively," Helena replied. "But ultimately, we decided to respect the privacy of those who haven't chosen to participate. We've made the information available to everyone we could identify. Forcing it further would violate their autonomy." After the presentation, several attendees approached Helena privately. One woman, in her 60s, explained that her own grandmother had shown similar features. Another physician mentioned a historical photograph collection at Yale that might contain similar cases. The research was inspiring others to look more carefully at historical medical evidence. That evening, Helena, Vincent, and Rachel had dinner together, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single photograph 8 months earlier. "You know what strikes me most," Vincent said, "is how much medical care matters. Catherine had the milder genetic variant, yes, but without Dr. Whitmore's intervention, she likely wouldn't have survived regardless. The combination of genetic factors and medical knowledge made the difference. And family support," Rachel added. "Jonathan Foster dedicated his medical career to keeping his wife alive, monitoring his children. That kind of commitment across generations created a legacy of awareness and care." Helena thought about Julia, about the descendants now under medical care, about Catherine Palmer fighting to survive in an era when her condition had no name. The photograph captured more than just a moment. It captured resilience, a family's determination to survive despite genetic odds. And now, 130 years later, that resilience is saving lives. A week later, Helena returned to the medical archives where everything had begun. She carefully placed the Palmer family photograph back in its protective sleeve, but not before making one final enhancement. She'd created a digital restoration that brought new clarity to every face, every detail. Looking at Catherine's young face, Helena whispered, "Your story mattered. Thank you for being brave enough to live it." The photograph would remain in the archives, available for future researchers, a testament to one family's 5-generation journey with a genetic condition that should have defeated them but didn't. Catherine Palmer had defied the medical odds of her era, and her legacy, genetic, medical, and human, would continue helping others for generations to come.